He received a formal education at Brooklyn's Pratt Institute, but it was the East Village of the 1980s where artist Richard Hofmann really got schooled. His canvas was the city, where he created distorted figures and took on topics like religion, homosexuality, redemption, and sin.
Well, some of the pieces still remain where he painted them on the walls of his old haunts, places like the Pyramid Club and Danceteria. But the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition has amassed a collection of Hoffman's work from the 1980s right up until his all-too-early death from complications of AIDS in 1994. And here to walk us through the retrospective is its coordinator, Ellie Winberg.
Thank you for having me here.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for being on BK Live, Ellie. We really appreciate it. Why don't we start with asking you, how did you get involved in Richard Hofmann's art?
Well, it's an interesting story because there was so much chance involved in this. A friend of mine, Brian McCormick, lives in the neighborhood where I have my art studio. And one day, by chance, we're talking, and he says, you know, there's all this artwork in our basement, and we're selling the building. What do we do with it? And then he talked about, well, you know, we just might even just dumpster it. And I said, no. And we might even just give, you know, pieces of away. And I said, no. Without even having seen the work, I knew it was a really unique opportunity because with so many artists, you're selling during your lifetime or giving it away, or it goes into this gallery or that. Right. But in the case of Richard Hofmann, his artistic career, unfortunately, was way too short. He really hit his prime in around 1985, even though he was doing club murals that are fantastic before then. And then he was too sick to continue after 1992, so that's a short 7 years. He was prolific.
So
and
a lot of work.
A lot of work. And he did oil paintings, mixed media, collage, photomontage, etchings, prints.
And for those who aren't familiar with all of his work, what strikes you about the themes that he used throughout his career?
Well, he said, I am painting autobiographically, but not to be self-indulgent. But what I see happening to me is what's happening in the world, and what's happening in the world is happening to me. So that's what I paint. He paints the community, the world around him. There's often a little baby, which could be little baby you, little baby him. And around that is often chaos. He paints suffering, but he also paints, you know, this ecstasy of emotions.
That's what's funny is that his work is at this sort of apex of this culture that happened in the 80s, and everybody was dancing and the clubs were huge, and like when you think of Danceteria or the Pyramid, these were like the epicenters of the coolness, but at the same time a plague was coming. That's
right, and you see that in his work. I mean, he did huge murals, which is also interesting about this whole trove that got saved. He might paint them there at the club. You have the big club night, and that was that night's theme. And then he actually took them all down, rolled them up, dated them, and saved them. So we have like over 40 club murals.
He was a hoarder.
Well, a hoarder of art, that's different. He really chronicled what he did. We have inventory sheets, slides, everything. He even saved the shower curtain that he painted.
So what are some of the challenges with mounting a show like this with someone who was so prolific but held on to so much of the stuff, even what some people might see as ephemera, but he was really about that archive?
Well, there were many challenges. One was just to get it out of the basement. When I convinced my friend, no, we have to have a retrospective. We have to have a big show for this.
And you were aware that it was his work that was in the basement?
I never saw it.
So you,
but I just
like
knew.
Greg says, oh, I got a lot of art in my basement. They sold the buildings. And you said, don't throw it out. You weren't even aware that it was Hoffman's work?
I'd never heard of Richard Hofmann. And when I asked people, because this is before the internet, I mean, now if you mention artists, you're just Googling it. Oh, yeah, I know him.
Gotcha.
But there's nothing to find because he's pre-internet.
And so quickly.
So, and it was a very traumatic period. So many artists, so many theater people, so many fashion people were dying that it was very sad. And Richard's partner, who meticulously saved it, and his he saved it, but it was too emotional to look at it. Even when we first pulled it out for this very show, 25 years later, he couldn't go through the whole show. He was just too emotional. And he came back, he's since come back many times to look at it. But that's what the period was. And many of Richard's friends who knew him as an artist and went to Pratt with him, when they've come for this retrospective, they get very emotional too. And it's hard. And then it breaks the ice, and then they start telling stories, and it's wonderful.
It's a tribute.
Yes.
I mean, I wonder how that plays in. I mean, some of these artists, they just aren't honored barely enough until they've already passed away. Ellie, like, what do you think Richard's lasting legacy is, and what does it mean to his friends?
Wow, that's a big one. He did paint the times, so many artists can tell you that when they're actually in their career, how difficult it is to get galleries interested.
Oh yeah.
And it's a pyramid. At the top, there's a handful of artists who make it famous and rich, and then there's everybody else. So there's luck involved. There is talent, but there's also just being in the right place at the right time and having what's in fashion. If by the late 80s, oil painting was kind of out, and silk screens and prints and photography were in, which is interesting because Richard did make a switch at the end, trying to stay relevant as he was dying. He was still experimenting. And I think that's part of his legacy. I mean, he was painting to the end, knowing what the end was, knowing that the end was going to be painful, because unfortunately, the AIDS cocktail, the one that was really effective, wasn't made public until later in '94, and he passed early in February 1994. He was protesting through his art the AIDS epidemic, how religion's stance against homosexuality, and how there was this huge public denial of the AIDS epidemic that not just the gay community, but women, people of color, children were denied entry into the AIDS trials that were so necessary.
Yeah, and people forget that sort of denial. I'm wondering what you hope people take away from all of this. I mean, what certain things endures from that period of art that Richard represented?
He was an activist through his artwork. He doesn't put it straight in your face, even though they're very, very powerful, emotional paintings. But it's through art, not like propaganda that like, oh, I'm against AIDS or I'm against the church or whatever. But he does it in a very aesthetic, very powerful way, using the tools of art.
Yeah.
And
we're looking at some of the work right now, including what is that, a vacuum cleaner bag?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he painted his shower curtain, and we still have it.
Yeah.
I mean, that maybe there is a little bit of a hoarding in there, but everything's an inspiration.
So knowing that, and like First Among Equals, all that jazz, is there a piece that really speaks to you in the retrospective? Is there something that if you close your eyes, you see the image of?
Well, there are many, because they are powerful pieces of work. Wow. There is one that's really touching, and people practically cried in front of it. He was influenced by the masters. And so he has one large piece that's painted on these big wooden crates that have a Tokyo address on the back. So we call them the Tokyo crates. But anyway, he says, after Goya, mother with deformed child. So we see an older mother on one side, a young mother, that's it, with a baby. And then this very mysterious figure, is it taking the baby away? Yeah. And we've seen some like very wonderful happy babies in some of his earlier pieces, even though he shows innocence born in chaos. But this baby, is this him at the end of his life thinking, oh, what was life all about? But he's still, he's the artist to the end. He doesn't censor his feelings. He just puts it out there on the canvas.
Well, it's all striking work. And can you please plug this? You're the curator of it. Where can people find and see this work of Richard Hofmann?
We're the Brooklyn Waterfront Artists Coalition. We call ourselves BWAC. and it's BWAC.org.
I love that.
Yeah. We call ourselves BWACers, but
Yes.
yes. And we are open through April 16th on this retrospective. It's in Red Hook, 481 Van Brunt, across from Fairway, second floor. And we also have other shows right now, and we start our member shows on May 13th. So we're always active. Check out our website.
That's great. The striking work of Richard Hofmann and BWAC.org for this and future shows.
It's going to be
Thank you.
a good spring in Red Hook.
It will be.